Welcome to episode 4 of the Life As Is podcast. I had to count, it's 4 already. Last week, I had the privilege, well, last time, may not have been last week that you listened or saw us, but last time I had the privilege of being interviewed by Archana about my stages of development. And this week, I'll be interviewing Archana about her development and going through the stages. And just before we get into that, just to remind ourselves that this is always individual, that as we grow and develop, our vertical developmental stages are part of that. There's lots of other things going on as well. We're developing new skills. We're, shifting in other ways that, maybe we are not talking about here. And it's part of our journey. So we're just showing you a glimpse of how we're traveling through this journey of being human.
Yeah.
Before we begin, anything you want to say, Archana?
No, I thought that was a great introduction, and I'm glad that you added that human complexity. So, whatever we are covering in our episodes or life is just a slice of it as seen through us. And I think that's the beauty of developmental journey as well, is that we are not like cameras going and taking pictures of life as is, right? And that's why, ironically, we have named our our podcast "Life as Is." So, life as we see it, basically,
Yeah.
and we make meaning. And I think humans are such complex beings. Is no matter how many episodes we make, we'll still not be able to capture all of it. And that's why it's very useful for both Sitska and I to keep extending invitations for you to come forward with the slice of life that you are capturing and sharing with us.
Mm. So, Archana, I'm just curious, and I wanted to do it this time, maybe also for the viewers, listeners, however you're taking this to you, a bit differently. Just asking you to think about your life and less in terms of the stages, like let's go to the stage, but more around what stood out in a certain period of your life. And then we may also get into some theory, but also paint a picture. So if you think about the first part of your life that you can remember, have a story about, what stands out about that period for you?
So when I look back, I just give you a little bit of history about myself. So my parents, they had a child, they had a son uh, who was stillborn. So he didn't make it in the world alive, and that must have been very painful for any parents. And then, because of the circumstances in which the child was born, it actually clogged my mother's fallopian tubes. So she couldn't conceive for another 12 years. And during that period, when you're desperate, you do everything that people tell you to do. So they went to all the temples, the mosque, and they were like as secular as an Indian can be. They went to every holy and religious place praying for children. And this is just to give you a context of my kind of origin in this world. And then I think this is my medical evaluation is that she took 12 years, or my mom's body took 12 years to heal, and the fallopian tubes open, and she conceived me. And she conceived me during actually a month long, what we call a havan or yajna, a month-long ritual, Hindu ritual. It's called Harivansh Yag. It's called the ritual to have a child. And so in that, you have to fast for a month, fast as in just fruits and nuts and all of that. You're not eating big meals, or there are certain practices that you have to observe. So they were doing that. And according to my mom, she conceived me soon after. So they attribute my birth to that big holy ritual that they did, and then I came in this world. So when I came in this world, I believe, and to a certain extent, I was this hope. I was this happiness or bliss to a grieving couple, and I came in this world. So I never lose sight of that, and somehow it drives me internally. And I obviously didn't realize that before. The more I kind of think about my position in the world and my place in my family system and what do I mean to my parents, etc., etc. So that's just my origin story. And And so one of the earliest memories I have is really every time, anytime we meet our relatives or our friends, and I have heard them say, "Oh, you are a miracle child," or "You are a miracle child." So that is one of the early sort of memories. And I think what that did is, obviously made me feel very special and important, but also placed a certain kind of burden on me. So, because like I felt like I have to somehow be extraordinary at all times. I have to be always this person who brought happiness to everyone. So, in a way, it was sort of like a paradox. What gave me happiness also felt like a constant responsibility on a small child. So that
Mm.
was one of the earlier moments for me. So what was happening is, of course, as a child, I was going when I was growing, and maybe a young child, I wasn't aware of others' needs and wants. I was just consumed with my needs and wants, and I was also just consumed with doing the right thing. But doing the right thing didn't mean doing the right thing regardless. It meant doing things in a right way according to others, and doing things if it's wrong, or if it's something that meets my need, to not be caught. So I remember, just like your story, Sitska, I remember a time when I was fascinated by comic books and chocolates. So those were the two of my my vices. And I actually remember stealing from my dad's wallet, like coins, some coins, to go buy comic books and chocolates. And zero guilt, no guilt whatsoever. I would enjoy my comics, enjoy the chocolates until I was caught. And that just brought embarrassment, not because I thought stealing was wrong, but because I got caught. So those are the kind of early sort of a young child, totally consumed with their needs and preferences, not really understanding that other people have their feelings also, that other people have their point of view and perspective, and everything was very concrete. So I was needed. So people needed to tell me how they feel before I could know how they feel. So my mom, for example, if she's sleeping, I couldn't care less that she's sleeping. If I wanted her attention, I'll go in her room, knock the door, and mom, 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 and she'll be like, "Oh, what?" And then I'll tell her what I need. I would not once stop and think, "Oh, she needed rest, and so she's sleeping, so I should have let her sleep." So that was my childhood. I'm just kind of painted a small picture
Yeah,
of the first memories.
yeah. And I'm curious, do you think in some ways that sense of being a miracle child, of on the one hand having that burden, but also perhaps having license, also allowed you to feel even more that you maybe had a right to get those comics and that chocolate?
I probably did. I think it was, and it's such a profound sort of thought now that I have. I don't see that sense in my siblings because they were not told that they were a miracle child, and I try to kind of assess how they see their place in the world, and I do feel like I have a certain sense of confidence as well I always had in approaching people, in approaching things, in approaching new way of being or experimenting. And I'm not sure if it's attributed to having that origin story or no, but I always felt like I had this daring sort of element in me, and I would just go for it. I would just go for it and do it.
Yeah.
So it could be that I was driven to always be that miracle. So, to keep
Yeah.
going and doing that extra. So yeah, that was there.
And I'm curious if what awareness you might have of how you then moved from this not being able to recognize others' emotions, um, really being out there for yourself, expecting that if you walked, actually something I recognize, I thought my mother never slept because whenever I walked into her room, she was immediately awake,
Yeah.
not realizing that I woke her up. Um, walking into her room and needing something and expecting her to be ready for you, into maybe feeling more part of a whole, more part of a group. Do
Yeah.
you know sort of around what age that happened for you and how that felt?
Yeah, I think that would be around from middle school to high school journey that I began to realize, and I began to almost like notice my needs and preferences. Like I began to reflect on the fact that I have needs and I have preferences, and this is what I do to get them. So that kind of began to happen when I was in school, and I slowly wanted to be a part of my friends group, or I wanted to have a lot of friends at home, sorry, a lot of friends at school. And when coming home, I was just gathering all the neighboring kids and wanted to kind of form a group of some kind. Like we had this play group, and then we had the school friends, and also I started to sort of almost kind of please people, like almost very eager to be liked by others.
Mm.
And I think I clearly remember times when I would just tell stories, my sob stories, to gain sympathy from others, to be liked by others. Like almost obviously, kids lie a lot, and kids, draw these fables and stories. And on one hand they're creative, but on the other they're just absolute falsity, right? So I remember doing those as well, because my drive to be liked was so intense. Like I remember getting a brand new, like I clearly remember I was given a fantastic, beautiful pencil case that I had never seen before. It was amazing. And so if I had been at an earlier stage, I would have just grabbed it for myself because, it satisfied my need. But now my need was to please people. So next day, I just gave it to my friend because I wanted her to like me, because I sensed that she's becoming closer to another friend. So I just gave that pencil case to her. And I still, to this day, I remember that pencil case. It was off-white color with lots of flowers on it. I still remember. And when I gave her, I thought about it. Like, so I was conflicted. I was like, I love that thing, but it's very important that she likes me. And I felt like I could buy people with material. I could buy people with doing things for them, and always be present and always be available. And it started at home also. Like even to my younger siblings, I would always be pleasing, like trying to please them, trying to be liked. And also what started to happen is I started to form these, it's like I was born in a Hindu Brahmin family. So whatever my parents told me, what it means to be a Hindu, what it means to be a Brahmin, and what it means to be a good person, I started to imbibe and absorb and just totally fused with it. I just believe that this is who I am, this is what I should do because my parents said that, or my teacher said that, or or the priest said that, or whatever. So I clearly remember going through that phase where it was all about being in alignment to my family, my friends, my school, my society. Like I was not a separate being; I was just fused with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember how that lived experience was? And I know that our memories are also stories we've started to tell each other, but do you have a sense of how it felt when you were in that fused state and when maybe you felt you might be out of it or almost out of it?
I think isn't it interesting? It's harder to remember when I was fused with it because I can't reflect on it. It's the moment
Yeah.
you ask the question, I realize that it's hard. I don't know. All I remember is what I was doing. I
Yeah.
don't remember how I was feeling because the moment I started feeling that this is what I'm doing, the moment I started recognizing that, oh my goodness, I'm so driven to please others at the expense of my needs and wants and preferences. So obviously, I wasn't going back to my needs and preferences
Mm.
stage, but it was something more was happening. It's like the relationships were still very important to me, but whatever they are saying may not all be absolute truth. So what is it? What do I think? And that started to happen, I would say, in college. So when I was in college, all of a sudden I'm meeting with a completely diverse group of people. Even my childhood, I was very lucky. We lived in a city where it was almost a cosmopolitan. For India, it was a cosmopolitan. So people from all walks of life, all states of India, they came there in that small city to work, and it was a very multicultural, multilingual society. So I had the exposure of differences. But when I went to college, it was a different kind of differences. So all of a sudden, I got exposed to this. And I realized that people pleasing is not going to cut out. Like, I cannot be just a part of one way of thinking here because differentiation is something I need. Like, I need to know who I am. and I can't just be flowing with this flow. And it wasn't very easy because I was still kind of torn by that need to please others, by the need to be liked by others. That was still a very, very strong driving force for me. I wanted people to like me, or at least I didn't want people to dislike me, if I can
Yeah.
put it. So I didn't want to do anything that hurt people. And I would go over the top, explaining myself all the time, and. And it was just a bizarre sort of moment where I wanted to like you, but I still like I'm forming my own view. So I remember
Mm.
this disequilibrium quite clearly, uh,
Yeah.
as opposed to how I felt when I was totally embedded. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like you don't know when you're embedded, right? Like you just
No. No, and I think the question I was trying to ask, and it's hard to ask, right? So it's, do you still have and I was also looking for that in myself, an experience of how was it to be that fused, to
yeah.
just be a part of something without maybe even know, as you say, knowing there's something else or you were separate. Um, and how was it when you, in the moments that that wasn't available, or you talked about giving this pencil case to this friend because you were afraid of losing her. So how did that then perhaps cause a niggle? And as I asked the question, I thought, yeah, maybe it's impossible to know that because we will only see that now through our lens of
Yes.
today. So we
Yes.
can't
Yes.
quite understand that anymore. So it sounds like almost as you went to college, there was this period of loosening that fusion, that I'm part of this, beginning to see there is difference, there's other ways of thinking, but still this sense of wanting to please those who are part of your group,
Yes.
um, having a hold on you maybe, or having an impact on you.
Yeah.
How did that develop further? How did you begin to think even more in difference and
So I would say now that we are having a discussion, that was perhaps the longest time I was in that stage because even going further, completing my graduation in science and then completing my graduation in law, and I think a couple of things also while I'm talking happened is I always felt like an outsider. So in school, I remember like my parents always wanted me to become a doctor. And I loved science, but science was more feeding my brain, but my heart was fed by humanities. And I loved writing, I loved debating and, discussing things. So there was more kind of like where I could critically think, where I had my opinions, whereas science, I found that science is, and it's more kind of memorizing and rote learning and all of that. So I felt like I always had that kind of fragments in life where I'm torn between the two, and also I had to please my parents, I had to somehow become a doctor. But when I went to college and away from my parents' house, I felt as if I could do whatever I want to do. So that feeling was developing slowly. And then I ended up enrolling into law, and I did law, which I knew did not please my parents. But at that moment, I don't think I bothered too much about that. It was like it was okay. I know that they're not going to be happy about it. But when I say I always felt like an outsider is so at school I was in science stream. So in India they split the stream after 10th grade. You go into science, commerce, or humanities. So I was in the science stream, but I was also a person who was very active in the literature side and humanities side. So I felt somehow like not belonging completely. Then I went to college and I did science again there. And again, I found myself in the debating society and in the humanities society doing other things, but was a science student. So kind of not belonging completely. Then when I went to law, I was one of the only student who came from a science stream into law. And so again, learning the new language of law and all of that. So I felt like I was always at the cusp of wanting to belong, but not able to, and always learning something different other than what my peers or my tribe was learning or focused on. So, but that phase was a much, much longer phase. And I don't know if you're okay for me to continue as to
yeah,
what happened.
absolutely.
So then, after doing law, we at that time we were in India. I got married, and then we moved to Australia. Now here, another ball game completely. So I did my law. I started. I went to a law firm. I started working, but I had to finish a few papers to kind of get the license in Australia again. And then, so moving from an Eastern society to a Western society, by that time, I had become a mother. My child was a year old. So, young mother, husband was always away, young single parent in a foreign country, trying to make sense of everything. So, I think that helped me um, with the tools I needed to now differentiate, now find out who I am, rather than always be on this cusp and tying up loose ends of my life all the time and going, oh, do I belong here or do I belong there? Now all of a sudden the chasm was so big that I needed something to stitch that chasm and kind of like integrate and just go, okay, all these differences somehow somewhere should be meeting, for me to make sense. So these are, like, I would say, life events that just allowed me to become more and more differentiated and more kind of going, okay, it's okay. I may have multiple strengths and I may have multiple interests, and I might be a science student and a humanities student at the same time. I don't have to be one or the other. So, so that movement from either or to both and journey started in this way for me. That's
Yeah.
what my early remembering like memories of splitting and kind of being okay, becoming okay with it. But it took a long while, took a long time for me.
Mm. And I was just wondering about, so one of the things I've really learned, and it was Elaine, who we both know, who said that once, that if you have a theme in your life, whether it's belonging or am I good enough, or, whatever the theme might be, that will also keep coming back in different stages.
Yes.
Um, so sometimes it's also, even if as I look back on my life, or if I talk to people about where they are, it can sometimes be hard to know, is that part of a stage, or maybe going back to a stage, or being in that stage right now because it serves me, or is that just a question? Maybe it's a wound I carry from my youth that I'm trying to resolve each
Yeah.
iteration again, and it
Yeah.
will feel different in each iteration, but it will coming back. So I'm curious, if you have a sense, was
Yeah.
that drawing out of this stage through really being fused to being more and more separate, and then accepting that actually all these bits could be there and could still be
Mm.
a person. Uh, do you sense that was more part of the stage journey, or is that also something that is just part of your developmental journey coming back?
That's a very, very good point. I think it's a combination of stage journey, my growth, and the environment that I was put in, and also the internal environment, as in my family structure and family environment. I think they were all playing a role. So my identity as a mother, as an outsider in a new country, trying to make sense of the culture, the language, not the language, but mostly the culture. And then at that time, I enrolled in the university and I started doing MBA, because by that time we realized that we may be moving to USA, where my law degree would be like completely, like, I'll have to almost redo the entire law college work, because they have a completely different law, like America. So Australia and India, they both had common law, so I was fine. In America, it would have been a different story. So then thinking that, oh, maybe I should get a degree that's applicable anywhere. So you can see,
Mm.
like, even while this time, like, I was very focused on, yes, I'm a mother and whatever, but I also was like focused on my professional career and all of that, thinking ahead and doing all that. At the same time, though, like, now that you're asking the question, I had become very aware that now that I have transcended this international boundary, I also ought to transcend whatever I am bringing with myself as who I am culturally, so that I can expand myself into this new environment also without losing myself or without losing my identity. How do I embrace new things, new way of thinking? So then we were very aware, and we were very deliberate about not going and becoming part of a like an Indian community, or like even small states, like all the states of India, they have their own smaller community where you go and you belong to that and you socialize with them and do everything with them. So we were very deliberately sort of like opposed to that idea and going, no, we'll just mingle with the entire society as is, and whoever comes in our life becomes our friend. So we are not going to choose our friends to be Indian or not Indian. Just leave that field open and see who comes into our lives. So a lot of my friends came from my college, from the university, and it was such an eclectic group of international people with Australians that I think that helped spur my growth again more and more and more, becoming more aware of the differences, becoming more embracing of them. And I think for me, my developmental journey in reality began there. Like the seeds were sown there, where I'm becoming more and more at ease and open with just different way to think and see life, and be okay with it. Whereas, and I can say that because I have met families who have only socialized with their types, with their tribe, with their community, with their country, or wherever whatever they identify with, and I can see the difference of how you can be confined in one way of thinking, or you can leave yourself open to many ways of thinking and being okay. So I would pinpoint that moment of opening up to new realities and totally be okay with it. So that was good. That it did me good in terms of development.
Yeah. So I think what I'm really hearing there is what you also spoke about last time, right? This we we are a unique human being, and then we come into a situation, and then the question is, how do we respond to that?
Yes.
And how do we maybe grow from that, maybe retract from that, maybe stay similar through that? I mean, there will always probably be some change, but very much this question of how do we choose to respond to certain
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah. And
So
it's
where
funny.
did
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
When you mentioned that we always have this theme that keeps coming and keep exhibiting itself, and it's
Yeah.
so true. Like I feel like I have still, I have been under this spell of, I used to say very proudly, I'm a very ambitious woman. I have the ambition of having the best family life ever. So I always like, I remember saying that out loud to people, and I have seen that that's what I've been doing. So we moved to Australia for my husband's job. He just suddenly got transferred. I left my legal career, moved with him because for me, like career was like it'll come, it can be, and I can make whatever, but family is my thing. So we are going to live together. Then when we moved to Australia, again, we started to see because of my husband's job and my hectic schedule, we had to regroup and rethink. Is this what we want out of life, or we want something more stable, something like a better family life? So then we moved to another part of Australia, Darwin. As soon as I started thriving at my work, and I was like almost at the peak of my career, in terms of what I got out of my job and everything, we moved again. So there you go. Again, without thinking, I was like, I found myself packing my bag, resigning from my job, moved the family to Darwin, and then starting all over again. And it was a completely different ball game because not sure how many people know, but Darwin is in the Northern Territory of Australia, and there you actually meet, work with, and interact with Indigenous people like nowhere else. In a city base, as I said. So Darwin is the capital of Northern Territory, and I was exposed to this amazing eclectic mosaic of what Australia can be or is, or what Australia not everyone sees. So then again, another growth spurt happened. When my neighbors were Indigenous, when my workmates were Indigenous, and I started to talk to them and mingle with them and started to have this affinity, this very strong affinity with their way of thinking, their way of being, and all of that. So that allowed my growth. But I was also becoming very aware of what I'm losing in this process. So I knew when we went to Darwin is I'm never going to have this conventional ascending ladder of career, but I'll have some meaningful pursuit no matter where I go. So, and I think that's a transformational shift almost for me, because I was, maybe I could have been trapped in this thought of, well, I have studied as much as you have, in terms of my husband and I, or maybe more, so I deserve equal, or I should have a equally ascending, career trajectory, all of that. So that could have been one way of thinking. The other way was seeing things as they are and making a choice again. So given that this is how it's going to be, I'll have a fragmented career of some sort. um, what do I choose? And I still chose family. I still chose, like, wherever we moved together, because I also started to see the big bonanza that came with moving. Every time I moved, I expanded my horizon. I really grew as a person, and also, given that we were very open, very deliberately open to receiving all those experiences as well. So I would say another transformational journey happened when there was a moment when I realized I'm never going to have a traditional career, and this is how my life is going to be, and this is how I maintain my ambition of having the best family life I can.
Mm.
So
And
yeah.
I hear more than that. So I hear what you're saying. So your choice was not to fight to have this traditional career and say, now we need to stay here so that I can um, further my career, or at least we need to negotiate about where we
Yeah.
go so that it's also
Yes.
good for my career. At the same time, I hear, so the choice you made to not do that was for your family. But I also hear that the choice you made then was not to only invest in your family, also to keep investing in yourself and your own development,
Yes. Yeah, and
right?
I think it's incredible. I mean, you would attest to that fact because you have moved around. If those of us who get this opportunity and who recognize that this is an opportunity, I think that's one way life actually gives you this light of progress, or life of development, if you can choose.
Well, and I think there's something though, and it just, as you were speaking, came to me that for me, maybe the biggest changes have come not so much of the choices to move to Australia or to study in the UK or to move to Switzerland, but more from the places where I surrendered to what was coming to me.
Yes, yes,
So, back problems or breaking my foot or having a tumor or those even, and in a way by saying, okay, so I, rather than going after my career, I actually surrender to the journey we're making as a family.
yes, yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, it's good to hear that from you, because yes, maybe that was my driving force more than just being with the family. I think there was something more for me there, to be able to continue on, and it didn't stop there. So Darwin, I had one of the most fantastical job, but we also have had our second child. Like, that was a very kind of planned thing. Is like, when we go to another place, we'll have our second child, and the child came, and another story. And then we moved to Texas, of all places, in a very small town in Texas, very conservative and everything. And there I chose to not pursue a profession while my baby was still young. I wanted to at least spend 2 years without interruption with her, and then thinking about it. So we were there, and there I was a stay-at-home mom, okay, in Texas. So I had this thing in my mind always. There was a notion about what stay-at-home moms think, what they do, how they spend their days, etc., etc. Now I became a part of this group. So in that group, they would talk about professional moms and how they neglect their family, how they neglect their child, how they, and it was fascinating. Like, I'm sitting there, and then suddenly I had this urge to advocate on behalf of the professional mothers and saying, no, 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 it's not like that, because, they obviously, we all think about families, just how you just have to manage the time, and etc., etc. So I found myself advocating for professional women in that group, and I thrived as a stay-at-home mom, which I never thought I would. Like, I always had this block in my mind that I'm just going to perish, I'm just going to shrink, and that would be bad for me. But I did that, and it was good. But maybe because it was for a short time, I can say that with confidence. If it just lingered, I don't know how I would have reacted. So then we got transferred again back to Australia, this time in a new city in Brisbane. I again same thing. I went to work. My kids started growing, and life was happening. And here, I found myself defending the stay-at-home moms because whenever the professional women will talk about stay-at-home moms in a very like that way, so in that and you can imagine in those moments, I was both, right? I was
Yeah.
both having that integrated self of identifying with this and that at the same time and feeling like, yeah, I,
Yeah.
I understand both worlds. So that was another beautiful journey. But what while I'm talking, I'm realizing that this journey wasn't immediate and quick. Like it took a long time to have those experiences over and over again to slowly then move to what we call the another stage of development, right? So my environment
Yeah.
was throwing these challenges all the time with me. Move, okay, no career, whatever, a new life, a new way of being, move. And then in those moves, I would say I was privileged enough, very lucky to be supported by the family, to be supported by the corporation. Everything was given to me. I wasn't like struggling every day. So if I just struggled, I wouldn't have grown. And so the
Yeah.
challenges were there, but there were also support. And it just kept expanding my horizon more and more. And you're right. Like, I think, and by that time, I probably started enjoying these moves because of what I was becoming,
Mm.
making those changes and meeting with people who just absolutely thought opposite of me. And yet, just being with them, I didn't have to reconcile. I didn't have to agree with them. I didn't have to like them or anything. But I was comfortable. I was comfortable where I was. So that I thought was very profound. During this time, I had formed my own values and commitment and assessment. Like I knew what I liked. I knew how the world works, or I thought I knew how the world works. Who am I? So very clear, finite, definite sort of theories about myself and theories about the world now, like were established, I would say, by this time. And
Mm.
then, um, and then we moved to Alaska, of all places. And I was so excited by this. I was like, oh man, this is going to be so hard that I'll either perish or thrive. Like there is no in between. It's just going to be one or the other. So then we moved to Alaska, and I cannot emphasize what it did to my soul. So this time it was deeper than just my job or my status or my identity. Like it just almost touched my soul, the mother nature. It was so huge and vast that I felt small. And in those moments, I kind of started to have the small glimpse of what spirituality may mean, what is being spiritual means is like surrendering yourself to this big vast scheme or design or whatever there is. I don't name it, I can't name it. There is something that is doing all these things, and I'm just a small part, an important part, but I'm a small, very very minuscule part of that. So all of those things started to happen when I found myself absolutely in awe of mother nature. There was, you know, I just all of a sudden became very small in this
Mm.
scheme of life. So that was a profound, I would say Alaska shifted a lot for me again.
Mm. And that's really interesting to hear because I recognize how finding one's place in relation to nature, for me, I think it's been very much Iceland, but also horses as
Yes,
beings in nature, and finding your relationships towards them can actually have a very profound impact on how we grow.
yes,
It's probably not something we often talk about in vertical development.
yeah,
And I've
yeah.
certainly found it's made a really big impact on
It
how
does.
I've grown. And in turn, how I've grown has made a big impact on how I see my
Yes,
horse's nature.
yes.
Yeah.
And probably, so now that you're saying, maybe that's why you have been growing so quickly. Like, because you have formed this amazing connection and relationship with nature. And I do feel, as you are saying, we don't really attribute interaction with nature or just connecting with nature in that way. That helps grow. So, and people can say, so is everyone in Alaska or Iceland developmentally like out there? No, it's how you connect. It's a very individual thing again, like how you connect with nature. So, for example, when I saw the Northern Lights the first time in my life, I literally stood frozen, literally also frozen in that moment, and just I had no words, and that was the first time I realized that words aren't needed. Words words are limitations. Language is a limitation. So all those things we say, but how many times do we experience those moments? And in
Yeah.
those moments, I experienced that I absolutely didn't need a language to connect, communicate, to be, or it was just for me. It was the most profound sort of laying another stepping stone for me to grow into something else. I think started happening in Alaska. So that would be
Mm.
my next phase of growth and development, and just how I saw the world, and it just felt like I remember. It just sort of like I started connecting with everything in a way that I never did. I started seeing more, becoming more aware, like the lichens, the moss, the fish, everything
Mm.
were like they were there, and I could connect with them. I could see them. Even the grass and
Yeah.
dandelions are now like they're a part of me, and I started almost seeing my own expression in them. That hadn't happened
Mm.
before. So that was Alaska for me.
And the word that comes up for me in relation to that, and I don't know if that resonates for you, is awe.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I
Yeah.
said. I just stood in awe. I was like,
Yeah.
that's, there is no other word. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And I would also say, like, that Mother Nature has always been very benevolent to me. Like, we don't win lotteries, we never do like raffles and all people do. We don't, but we always win the nature lottery. So, the Denali Mountains in Alaska, people say you can only see it clearly like 10% of the time or 30% of the time, whatever. I have seen it 100% of the time. Each time I go, I see it, like the whole thing. Or there are bears. You can watch bears in a spring, for example, and people say, oh yeah, you can see them randomly sometimes, 10%, 20%, 100%. Always there'll be bears, and I'll see them. And so I think there is that special connection with Mother Nature. As well, and
Mm.
that's also why I loved living in the Northern Territory. The way you interact with the rugged and the rough and raw nature in Northern Territory is also quite special.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that's where that journey began. And then, despite my liking, we had to come back again to the modern world in Brisbane. So the second journey started, and then, but I always there was this niggling thing. I, just by habit, I came to Brisbane and I started applying for jobs, started giving interviews, and a couple of interviews I was like almost there, almost made it, but didn't. So that happened twice. And then I came home and I'm thinking, is this a message? Like, is this something that I'm not able to read? So why is that? That I'm like, oh, you are the finalist, but oh, you didn't make it, like for some weird reason. And then I thought about it, and at that time, my daughter, my older one, she was in 10th grade, and we had come back. So I remember my husband and I, we always used to have this very light moments where I would say, oh, when our children are in 10th grade, one of us should just quit our job and spend time with them, like more time with them and all of that. So that was sort of like that came to me, and I was like, oh, is it something that I should be doing now? And she needed more emotional support also at that time. She got affected by seasonal affective disorder in Alaska. So when we came back, she needed a little bit more kind of support and emotional support and all of that. So then we were like, oh, okay, maybe it's time. However, I can't just sit at home, wait for her to come from school. So what should I do? And then whatever work I did in Alaska, it just kept me thinking about an unfinished business. It's like I need to understand more. I need to understand more about how societies work, how people feel happy and well-being. Not happy, but what is well-being? Like it was sort of like coming to me. It's like I needed to know more, and then I was like, how else would I know about something? And the answer was, well, go do PhD. And PhD, what it offered me was a flexible hour. So when people think, oh, so you wanted to just kind of do something easy and you did PhD, that wasn't the thing. Like I wasn't thinking, obviously. I thought doing a PhD will give me flexible hours. I can spend time with my daughter while also learning and doing something more meaningful. So then I enrolled into my PhD, and lo and behold, the guide under who I was doing PhD, he had started exploring this developmental psychology. So then he said, "Oh, would you be interested in bringing together well-being and developmental psychology?" I had never heard of it before. No idea about constructive developmental psychology, human development, adult growth. None of those concepts were familiar, but I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And the rest is history, as they say. So I took a deep dive into this theory, and then I started seeing myself. It was at that moment I became fully aware of the fact that I have been on this developmental journey. There have been stepping stones, there have been these markers when I develop into this stage and develop to that stage, and also I have the potential to keep growing and developing. So that was another, I would say, a profound step. And profound in the sense that it didn't enhance my experience, but it definitely gave me words and tools, and to understand what was happening to me. So that was 5 6 years ago. So that happened, and then yes, and then there I am. I'm still kind of working, digging deeper into this theory and trying to understand. So that's where I am.
And what has it given you to be able to reflect on your life from that lens rather than from any other lens? What has it added?
Yeah, so in a very basic way, I realize that I have a lens, that I do see world through a lens, and people have different lenses. And I think that was amazing. The moment I realized, I think what happened is I realized that I want people to be a certain way, and I expect people to react in a certain way, or I get disappointed when people don't react in a certain way. And then I realized, oh, because they all have different lenses, just like I have a different lens. So that was the most basic form in which it revealed itself. Why do my mother say things the way what she says, or the way she does things, or why do my dad, behave the way he does? So first of all, it was very immediate: family members, parents, friends, and slowly I started to kind of understand first myself. And then I could see myself as a part of this system, that I change everything and everything changes me at the same time. So other people, if they say something, I feel sad, they are not wholly responsible, and I'm not wholly responsible either. It's the interaction between the two. So all these kind of sophisticated thoughts, they started coming and becoming more easily available to me. And also what happened is, like, now, as of today, where I stand, you know how at stage 4, so I was talking about stage 3 and 4 transition so far. So we form a clear value, like I live by my values, my ideals, my belief system. So I recognize that I do have a belief system. I do have certain values, like, don't lie, be a good friend, or whatever those values are. And now slowly the crack has started happening in that as well. It's like I have started to see that I have values and belief systems. So I've started to see that as an object now. And now that I've started to see them, there are some cracks happening there. So I'm starting, maybe there's just a beginning of losing a grip on my values and my assessment. It's to not say that I'm going to live like less ethically or less value-based life, but what it means is like allowing myself to just be, grow, and see how we go. And just seeing my values and my systems and my assessment of the world. And what I'm seeing now, everything is changing all the time. I'm changing. Who I am is changing. What I think is changing. And it happens to everyone, but it's just the awareness that I'm now living fully with that awareness. And one of the things that you have given me very profoundly every time we speak, and you just give me the opposite of what I'm thinking. And now what is happening is I'm like going, okay, so I'm thinking white, but there's also black. So life is gray. And what I'm saying is very simplistic, but that's how, like, I'm becoming more able to bring the opposites together and just living with it. And it's only, the journey has just began. It's in its infancy, and it's hopefully going to grow. But that's where I am today. So there are cracks in my belief system. There are cracks in the way I think of myself. And my identity, I think, is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And that's so if today someone asks me who I am, It'll be just for the moment because I am changing all the time. Yeah.
Which is great because we were having a offline conversation, right, on WhatsApp about the word authentic.
Yes.
Um, and as you were speaking, it made so much sense because I haven't believed in authenticity for quite a number of years now as a word or a phrase. And Arowana Hayashi, who's a meditation and dance and movement teacher, who I've learned so much from, she used to say, I think authenticity is an inquiry. So it's a question about who am I now? And what you just said just really rang that so true for me. So how can the word authenticity be helpful if what might be authentic now may not be authentic anymore now, right? So
Yes.
it could be
Yes.
even in the second. And what, yeah, so my question has been, what is authentic?
Mm.
Does it even exist?
Mm.
Um, and also if I start to understand myself as more part of the whole, part of the universe, and the universe coming out also through me,
Mm.
then what is authenticity? Because then if it's in me, it's probably in others as well. So,
Mm.
and everything could actually be authentic. So, but that sentence you had about how, who am I now, who am I later,
Mm.
um, and that fluidity, just for me, really landed that.
Yeah, and it's only happening now. Like it has been a very long journey of constant inquiry, and also I have been so privileged to be able to study, this subject, to be able to practice this subject with people like yourself. A lot of people don't have this luxury or time, So I think it's an absolute privilege to be able to inquire, and it was in one of those. It was one of those motivations for both you and I, Sitska, where we just thought that we just share this luxury and privilege that we have gotten and inviting others to chime in and just tell us about their journey or maybe identify yourself. Where do you find yourself in this journey? But I would just like, Sitska, you to kind of maybe talk about that again. You remember when I was just obsessing over how developmental journey has given me the capacity to be more compassionate, more empathetic, more in this, and I was becoming very obsessed with that because that had become my absolute belief system, to be compassionate at all time, to be empathetic to all time. That had become my value system, and you threw in that spanner that put that crack on it, and you showed me the other side. So can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I want our audience to also be a part of that conversation.
Yeah. If I can remember it. Sometimes I say things and I can't remember them. So I think when something like this, and correct me if I say something now that isn't what I said then, it still be true or not true, I don't know. But I think it was about the do we become more compassionate as we grow? And I thought in some ways, yes, we can perhaps see more. So that might lead us to be more compassionate. But in other ways, we might be experienced even as less compassionate because we might cut through things, and we might not, as someone, for instance, in the stage I would call a diplomat who's really caring about being in the group and almost fused with that group. So I don't think, and there are shadow sides as well.
Yes.
Um, we become obsessed with ourselves maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah.
We begin to think too much, maybe that we are right and that others are not right. So I think compassion is something that we develop alongside,
Yes.
um, or not. And
Yes.
I have no doubt there will be people who may progress through the stages who have less compassion and people who progress through the stages
Yes.
who have more. I think it makes it perhaps easier to look back and understand where you can meet people at. But
Yes.
it doesn't necessarily mean it's not like it's perfect. There's
Yes.
darkness in every stage. There's darkness in later stages as well. And in some ways, in later stages, it might be more easy to manipulate people. And
Yes.
so if we don't work with the darkness that we have, and we do get that, I think each of us has light and darkness both.
Yeah.
And maybe light and darkness are the same. I'm not even sure they're different. Uh,
Yes.
but to keep it simple, let's assume there's light and there's darkness, and they both live in us, and maybe they're the same. But if we don't work with both of them, then I could suspect we could be very little compassionate
Yeah.
at later stages.
Yes. And I
Um,
think, what we talked about, I can give you a very small example. So one of our neighbors where we live, she is very compassionate in that sense for animals, for cats particularly, to the point where she's not allowing the cats to be neutered or spayed. So they're breeding all over the place. And we almost have 50 cats living with her. So not inside her house, but outside. So there is this inconvenience to other people. There are vehicles that are moving and they're afraid of driving there anymore because there are little kittens everywhere. The neighbors are complaining of the smell, the inconvenience. Some neighbors are very afraid of cats. So in that moment, I actually, when we were having this conversation, and that evening I was doing an evening walk around my compound, just went there across that her villa, and I recognize what you said is like, yes, but it's her way of compassion which is coming in the way of other people's life. So is this compassion for everyone else, or is that how she is firmly believing that this is compassionate, and has drawn that line there without any consideration for how compassion comes from other people, how compassion also can come from being considerate about how my compassion is inconvenience for others. Does that make sense? So then,
Absolutely.
yes, so then in that moment also I could see, how we can question. So one of the ways I realize is one of the ways we grow is by questioning our current belief system. So the moment we start questioning our current belief system, we start growing, because then we can look at it as an object and go, oh, yeah, so first I have my needs, then I start to question, oh, is this just my need important, or others also have needs? So we are questioning our needs, growing. Then we are belonging, and then we are like, oh, should I just belong in a group unquestioningly, or can I also question my sense of belonging? And then you start question, then you come up with your own belief system, own values, own. And then there comes a time when you start to question your belief system. It's like, okay, I have formed this idea about compassion, and then the crack starts happening, and then you are questioning that belief system, and then you grow into someone who starts to see, as you said, compassion and the darker side of compassion at the same time, and then you take action where you are practicing your compassion but without inconveniencing others. So then, slowly you start growing. So I think one of the very simple things that I have learned from development is the moment we begin to turn around and looking at the current way of thinking, questioning, then we grow, then question, then we grow. And as we are growing, it's kind of more expansive. So I think in that sense, we have always advocated for growth, or on like in support of development, just because it gives you more expansive capacity to look at the world, isn't it?
Yes, and it gives you options in many ways. So think, and that's what I appreciate about it. So it gives you options. That also brings with it accountability.
Yes.
Remember, and this was at the time not necessarily related to vertical development. It was more related to a conversation I was having when I was doing my master's in group relations training. And we were talking about how sometimes um, we can allow ourselves, this usually has to do with our valency, so something that we have a tendency to, um, we can allow ourselves to be used by the system. And I was talking to someone about that, and I was realizing that there used to be a time in one particular team that I was actually, at that time, I was working in it, where I allowed myself to be the one who was always giving our manager feedback. on behalf of either our smaller management team or a wider group. And I was always the one who would speak up. And sometimes I would speak up on behalf of things I didn't even believe in. So I would challenge and I would say, well, but we should really do this. And I'd be thinking, why am I doing this? I don't even believe in it. But somehow I was the one who would always speak up and fight for injustice, as someone pointed out to me, but not always actually for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And we were, plus, if I always did it, how was anyone else ever going to do it?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and it was interesting. So we were talking about this, and this woman said to me, and I'll never forget, she said, as long as you don't know that you're doing it, you're still innocent of it. But as soon as you know you're allowing yourself to be used on behalf of something that needs to happen in the system, you cannot claim innocence. So now you have to choose. Are you going
Yeah.
to go along with it? What is that doing for the system? What's that doing to you? Um, or are you going to break that pattern? But in any case, you can never blame others for doing it anymore because
Yes.
you know it's happening. So
Yeah.
you've got to, and that's a little bit how it feels to me also progressing through the stages. It's
Yes.
also a losing of innocence, and a more
Mm.
accountability
Mm.
for my behavior, I feel. Now, I'll still, and last week, I'm pretty sure many of my teammates would say, oh, we did not see a late stage individual there. And I was not, or maybe I was, I don't know. But I think there were many things going on and I was not showing up as my best self.
Yeah.
Um, so that will happen. And in the moments that I can be inhabiting this one of the later stages I've gone through, it also feels like that puts not a heavy, but it asks something of me. There's an aspiration then for how I behave. And there's certainly less of a reason to say, oh, well, they did that to me, or because
Yeah.
actually I know I was part of it. And if anyone did anything to me, I allowed, unless it's great violence, and I don't think I have that under control. But if someone in an organization does something that I maybe not find pleasant, but I'm going along with it, then I was part of that. So it allows me to notice far more of the
Yeah.
moments
Mm.
where I'm complicit in what happens, even though I'm pretending I'm the victim, maybe. Um,
Yeah.
or I'd
True.
like to pretend because I can't anymore. Um,
That's
I've
lovely.
really enjoyed
Yeah.
listening to your journey. And I think one of the things, though, that I wanted to say before you asked me a question, and then I just wanted to say, I think one of the beauties of listening to you talk about your journey, um, was how you made all these choices, which were around growth
Yeah.
and around even something that could have been seen as a negative choice, like I'm not going to have my career. Um, but you made it both positive to be with your family and positive to keep learning from that, to keep opening up to other things, to not then, because you could have also said, well, then all I'm going to do is just, spend time with my daughter, and I'm
Mm.
now going to agree with everyone who's around me. And then when I go back to work, I'll agree with them. So those have been maybe not conscious, but certainly choices you made
Yes. Mm.
that have shifted you.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that's, yeah. So for our audience, I think this is probably enough content for for an episode. And we would
Probably.
love to. I think by this time, our audience are probably well versed in developmental journey. And we fully expect another episode where we would just be taking their questions. I don't know when that'll happen, but that will happen. So
Yeah.
over to you, Sitske, to wrap up our episode for the day.
Yes. So if you have questions, do send us a note. There'll be a way to contact us in the show notes. If you have a particular story that you'd like to share, also let us know. Or if you have a topic you'd like us to make an episode on, please do let us know and we'll think about how we do that. I think probably next episode, but we might change our mind because we do from time to time. And actually, that's what I love about the way we do this and the flow of this.
Yeah,
We'll probably look at the work of Keegan to give you another lens on vertical
yes,
development,
yeah,
because I think in this work, also having different lenses on the work is really, really helpful. And then we'll take it from there. We look forward to your questions and inquiries and responses.
yeah. Well, I loved it, and I'm hoping that our audiences did as well. And see you next time.
See you
Bye
next
now.
time.